This is the Fantasy Sanctuary, the unofficial home of best ball in Europe. Joining us today, Fantasylife's Chris Allen, who has been killing it in the content streets lately. This is another great day at best ball, so let's get into it. Yes, that is right. We are back for another Draftkings Best Ball draft and joined, of course, by Chris Allen of Fantasylife. Chris, it's July. Things are going to crank up a gear very quickly. We were just talking about it before we came on. What are you most interested to find out about between now and the season starting? It could be anything like that we're going to find out in training camp or in the preseason games. What's the one unanswered question you've got you'd love to know right now?
I want to know if the Patriots are going to be good or not.
Yes.
I believe if you just look at Drake May as an archetype of quarterback, he would be the guy that if we knew he was good, even if we had an inkling of whether or not he'd be good, he would be going rounds ahead of where he's currently being drafted right now. And with the fact that their week 17 stack, like for the fact that if we want to do that type of correlation with the Chargers, a lot of those pieces are fairly easy to pick up as well. It's like the environment to get a highly correlated game stack is already there. I mean, we've already priced that into like that particular situation. And Drake May being the type of quarterback where he has the scrambling ability. We saw that throughout most of his collegiate time, like in North Carolina. We know that the downfield like portion is there as well. And even some of the pieces around him, like the current pieces, whether it's Demario Douglas, whether even like Hunter Henry at tight end, like the veterans that are currently there, we like those. And the incoming rookies as well, whether it's Jalen Polk. I wrote up like his rookie profile over on fantasylife.com. Go and check that out if you get a chance. I really like the fact that, I mean, any of the Huskies, like wide receivers, I mean, everybody's into like that trio of wide receivers coming out of Washington. But even Javon Baker, I mean, stylistically, Javon Baker kind of profiles as that guy that you would want to have for week 17, because you can see a scenario where Drake May, air raid-ish like type quarterback, launching bombs downfield. Javon Baker, I would say in that Devontae Parker, where it's like he could have a few catches, 4 or 5 catches for over 100 yards, grab a touchdown, the guy that you would need in week 17. Like all the pieces like surrounding the Patriots, I believe are pieces that we can somehow tell ourselves a story that we would want to invest in. But it all comes to like, can Drake May be that guy? When will he start? I mean, if you spend like a high draft pick, was third overall, whenever he went, I mean, that's when a guy like that is typically going to start at some point during the season. But when's he going to start? And is he still that guy that we saw in North Carolina? So if I even had like the inkling of that, I would be all about. I mean, like take away all the other offseason like type of stuff. Is Deshaun Watson coming back? Is Joe Burrow going to be healthy? What is like, is Bo Nix actually going to be good? Like what's going on with Michael Penix and Kirk? I mean, there's so many offseason storylines that I think we're going to be so keyed into and so tied into once training camp start here in the next couple of weeks. But I think for my money and where I've like, honestly, like where I have like most of my best ball bags packed at this point, are the Patriots going to be good? Like where my money's at, I'm hoping that's the case. But if I just had just a little bit more on it, like if I just had just a little bit more, like just data or just like even just like some shots from camp to let me know that Drake May still is that dude, I think I'd be a little bit more comfortable with where my exposures are at right now.
Yeah, and with the Patriots specifically, the one kind of thing that I keep coming back to is, can Kendrick Bourne come back and be useful like he was last year?
Yeah.
Kendrick Bourne looked good with Mac Jones. So, like, there's part of me that thinks, okay, now give him a quarterback like Drake May who can create outside of structure, who can keep defenses honest because he's rushed for over 1,500 yards over, like, the last couple of years or whatever. So, does that make Kendrick Bourne's life easier and he gets some easier looks and stuff? I'm not going too heavy on them, but yeah, the Patriots backdoor stack, it's just too easy at the minute. Like it just feels very much like one which everybody should be doing. Let's jump into a draft, and as we do that, there's plenty more that I want to pick your brain on, because like I say, you've been churning out content left, right, and center. In terms of the team previews and bits that you've been doing, Cliff Kingsbury's air raid scheme that kind of came up in some of your in some of your articles. How is it that you feel about that offense when it comes down to people saying Cliff Kingsbury is just going to be a air raid offense? Is there more to him than just that?
Definitely more, but I do think that we need to, I would say, just temper our expectations for the long haul. In year one with Jaden Daniels, knowing what he can be like as a not just a scrambler but as a downfield thrower, I mean, all of that at least like puts you in the mindset of like, could this be Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury like year one, where it was like Kyler Murray really ascending into like the QB1 ranks? Now, do I think Jaden Daniels is the same caliber of quarterback or same caliber of passer as Kyler Murray? No. But can he still create enough so that he's putting his wide receivers and the running backs associated with the Commanders like in a place to actually score? Yes. And I think Kingsbury has enough in his bag that would put them in a place where you're getting the play volume that you would want, like have an offense that's more, let's say, conducive to scoring fantasy points. Because when he was throughout their first, like I think even over their first like 3-ish seasons or something like that, like with the Cardinals, I mean, they were running at like a breakneck pace. I mean, they were first in like in play rate, like using shotgun in order to make sure that a guy like Kyler Murray, which is like shorter in stature compared to Daniels, but at least like from a shotgun and play action perspective, he was putting his team or putting his quarterback in the most like more efficient spots, and even like incorporating like other as many personnel on the field as possible, like using like 2 tight end sets, which gives at least a bit more credence to a guy like Ben Sinnott, who I'm not completely in on at this point, just because I think Zach Ertz, with his tie to Cliff Kingsbury, like already has at least some ability to be that guy that might block some of what Sinnott can be in his first year. But overall, I mean, Cliff Kingsbury did enough from these using like more of these shorter passes and also some deep bombs as well in order to make sure that guys like Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, I'm more on Terry McLaurin than Dotson, but either way, I think there's enough there from Kingsbury from a play volume standpoint, from a pace perspective as well, that like the Commanders, like just having a guy like Jaden Daniels already gives us the confidence that we would want in order to start investing in them. But I think Cliff Kingsbury also gives that whole offense the juice that kind of makes the whole thing kind of work together, in the fact that I'm really trying to get as many of the Commanders as possible.
Love it. So we are a couple of seconds away from the draft kicking off, and we'll see if any of those commanders land on our plate. We're picking at the 103. Christian McCaffrey goes at the 101, assuming Dak goes at the 102. Dak, CeeDee Lamb, sorry, has fallen to us at the 103. Is that an auto click for you?
That's an auto click, like 100%. I was actually writing up an article. This is like me switching into redraft mode for a second, but writing up an article drafting from the 102, and CeeDee Lamb is typically the guy that most folks are taking at the 2 spot. But looking at like wide receivers, like assuming everybody's taking like CMC at the 101, and you're left with kind of the wide receivers that are going to be available, whether it's like Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb. You can talk me into Jamar Chase, because I live in Ohio. I've been a Bengals fan for over 20 years. So like, you're not twisting my arm if you want to say that you want to take Jamar Chase there. But you're really trying to make the bet of who that wide receiver 1 is going to be like by the end of the year. And so if you want to look at like the top 3 wide receivers that have finished in the top 3 over the past 3 seasons, where it was Lamb or Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra, Devontae Adams like a couple of years ago, Justin Jefferson. I mean, all those guys, they've all been guys that have at least been at or around like a 25% target share the year before they wound up getting into the top 3. I mean, so these are guys that like they are known commodities. They don't just come out of nowhere. I mean, also, and of like the 9 wide receivers to finish in the top 3 over the past 3 seasons, over half of them have come from teams that have been in like the top 10, top 12 in passer over expectation. And I said, if I'm remembering correctly, 7 of the 9 have also comes from teams that were also in the top half of the league in EPA per play. So it's like we can kind of like work backwards and say, all right, well, what kind of teams can we expect, or which teams can we expect to have that type of pass volume and also still be efficient? I mean, CeeDee Lamb, like I am somewhat concerned about the fact that they have had taken somewhat of a step back on their offensive line. I don't know, or like we don't really have a feel for who that wide receiver 2, 3 is going to be for them outside of Jake Ferguson, obviously being the second pass catcher there. But still believe in Dak. Still think that offense is going to be like high in terms of passer expectation. So between him, Tyreek Hill, I mean, those guys are, for me, those are easy clicks and easy bets to make for guys that are going to be finishing at the very least in the top 3, if not the wide receiver 1, like by the end of the season. So yeah, CeeDee Lamb is like, that's falling to the 103. Yeah, I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, for me, if we're throwing ADP out and I was doing ranks completely ignoring it, when I started putting my rankings together first time this offseason, Jamar Chase was the player who I was like, you know what? Wide receiver 1 feels really like it's very much there in the possibility, particularly at the time with some of the T. Higgins stuff. And I know the Bengals are anemic when it comes to trading players, but it did feel like that was a bit more of an option than maybe it ended up, particularly around the draft. There was just enough chatter that it felt like it might happen. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb, very much an easy click at the 103. Rich in the chat saying, why do I never get CD at the 103? It's just one of those sad things. We'll miss on players.
That never happens to me either, man. Never happens to me.
Appreciate everybody in the chat checking us out, though. We've got a lot of good guests coming on over the next few weeks. So do hit subscribe if you haven't. Next week, we've got Dwayne McFarland. The week after that, Mike Leone. Then Ian Hartitz, Rob Coakley from Spike Week. A lot of good people coming onto the channel. Chris, we are one pick away. Jonathan Taylor's fallen 6 spots past ADP. Devin Achan's right around there. Somebody I feel like I possibly need a little more of. And then it's Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Deebo Samuel. Where are you leaning in this range?
I would lean towards like Jalen Waddle if we can pick him up at the next spot. I'm just really liking like how like his like the target competition obviously with Tyreek Hill like kind of lends itself towards it being something of a struggle for looks, but I mean, it really is like the 1A, 1B type of situation. When they were both healthy a couple of years ago, I mean, they took up over 50% of the targets from Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, they were snatching up literally everything. And even in the weeks that he was healthy last year, when he wasn't going out because of a lower body injury, I forget, it was like hamstring, knee, something like calf, something along those lines, where you'd see him in for a series, off on the sidelines for a little bit. But even in those, like his target share was still up like above like 20-23%, somewhere in there. Air yards were still like in at least the high end, like wide receiver 2, like 1B type of situation. So if he can still keep it all together, stay healthy, I don't care about, at least I care less about them adding Odell Beckham, Jonnu Smith. I mean, they still should be able to operate as normal. And again, like kind of fits that criteria I was talking about earlier in terms of guys that you want to take bets on to outkick their ADP from an early wide receiver standpoint.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to some points in there, but we've got Devonta Smith who'd give us week 17 correlation with CeeDee Lamb.
Just about to say that.
Yeah, or the San Francisco guys. Any go with Devonta?
Yeah, I'll take Devonta Smith there. I mean, more, I'd say breaking ties in favor of the week 17 correlation does make some sense. And I've been kicking around this idea, and I've been seeing it more and more over the last couple of weeks. But just what is like, can we really see a scenario where Devonta Smith, or the gap between AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, like start to close this season? Because I know last year it took like 6 or 7 weeks like for us to really see Devonta Smith start to hit some of those same utilization targets that we saw back in 2022. And for a while, folks were, especially for where Devonta was being drafted at, many folks were asking like, well, where is Devonta Smith? It was AJ Brown getting the, 125 yards and a touchdown in 7 straight games, kind of leaving Devonta Smith out in the cold. But from a targets per route run perspective, and also like air yards, he was still kind of meeting some of those, especially once like Dallas Goedert went down. But now in this Kellen Moore-led offense, where we can at least expect, I'm not going to say that their passer expectation is going to hit anything that we saw when he went to the Chargers or when he was with the Cowboys. But either way, like if that pass volume starts to pick up, and he also starts to play some of that role that we've seen for guys like CeeDee Lamb, for guys like Keenan Allen, where we start to move him back and forth, whether from flanker or into the slot, while AJ Brown like primarily plays the X. I mean, this could be a really like fantasy relevant fantasy relevant role for Devonta Smith this season. So while I'm still all in on AJ Brown, I've been kind of like wavering on whether or not I want to take like AJ Brown or Puka, like guys like that typically go towards the back end of the first. But if I can pick up Devonta Smith like at like somewhere around like the 2-3 turn, especially for like a week 17 correlation like we have him here, I mean, yeah, this is about as solid of a start like that I would want for this type of draft.
Yeah, I mean, Devonta Smith, obviously, the on off splits with Dallas Goedert are quite substantial, but it was also just, when AJ Brown started struggling, a lot of that was attributed to Jalen Hurts being injured. But Devonta Smith didn't really miss a beat. He went out there, he was having big games, like really big games. I'm pretty sure even in the playoffs, he had a game over 100 yards or so. So I'm very much all in on Devonta Smith. And I think that it's kind of interesting to see whether he can break into that second round, much like Jalen Waddle's kind of done. And Jalen Waddle is a player that I'm actively trying to get because Raheem Mostert isn't going to score 20 rushing touchdowns again. I think we can say that with confidence. The Miami defense looks like it's going to take a step backwards. They've lost a fair few pieces off that defense. So if Miami ends up in more of a shootout situation, then Jalen Waddle's absolutely going to have a bounce back. We've got a couple of interesting teams in here. We've got the team out of a 101 went Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, then Josh Allen. So no wide receivers through 3. The team at the 109 went Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, and Lamar Jackson in what is some very nice pieces, not particularly a build that I would do. And then the team at the 105 went Bijan, Kyron Williams, and Travis Etienne to start. So definitely a mix of strategies. Jalen Hurts goes a couple of picks before us. We've got one pick to go. Wide receivers starting to dry up, but there is T. Higgins, who feels like a very easy click. I know that you mentioned in today's Fantasy Life newsletter that you find T. Higgins an easier click than my boy Zay Flowers. But if T. Higgins is here, is that the obvious one, or would you prefer some week 17 correlation with Amari Cooper matching up with Miami Dolphins in week 17?
I wouldn't mind that going with Amari Cooper, just because we do know that that's kind of like where most of the targets are going to go from that point. But I mean, you're not twisting my arm like if you want to go ahead and take a T. Higgins, but I think Amari Cooper like might be the better bet here. I'm
happy to go with T if you want and see if Amari Cooper makes it round to us, because sometimes Cooper's the more likely play at 4 lately.
Yeah, that is true. So let's go ahead and lock up T like for right now.
Yeah, the team at the 101 is probably going to need at least one wide receiver there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just feels like more often than not in these drafts, Amari Cooper is the one who falls out of T. Higgins, whereas T. Higgins a month ago, and there we go. We get Amari Cooper
we get
back.
him. Yeah, we got him anyway.
6 spots past ADP. Got to play the draft board sometimes. I put out a video last Friday talking about best ball basics, the key things that people need to do when they're looking to take the best ball game to the next level. And that's absolutely part of it. Just keeping an eye on what's going on in the room. It seems obvious, but little bits like that can make a difference. And so through 5 rounds, we've got CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, and Amari Cooper. How many of your builds would you say are going pure zero RB this summer, or you try to mix in a lot of hero RB as well?
More hero RB is where I've typically leaned, but it's been more ADP dependent, or like where I wind up taking where I'm drafting from. Because if I'm drafting more from the back end, I'm not as high on like Jahmyr Gibbs or guys that typically will fall like towards the back end of the first. So I have been going more like your true zero RB, like if I do get like a 10, 11, 12 spot like as my starting point. But if I am at the front of the draft, I mean, if you're going to give me like Devon Achane in the 3rd round, if I'm going to get like if Kyron Williams like happens to fall like into the 3rd, I mean, some of those guys, I might modify my approach thinking that, yeah, if I already have a CeeDee Lamb, if I'm starting off with Tyreek, I'm starting off with Jamar, let me go ahead and make my strengths stronger, and I have no problems with starting like 4 wide receivers like every single week, and like strong like 4 wide receivers like what we have like sitting right here, where it's like I have no issues like having all these guys like in my starting roster on a week-to-week basis. And then I'll figure out like running back later, because especially once you get into like the 7th, 8th round, I mean, a lot of the running backs there that are going to be available there, I like a lot of those guys. I mean, most of the guys that are like fairly priced, and I can tell myself a story about how each of them can at least creep into let's say top 24, not always like RB1, but at the very least top 24 upside for a lot of them on a weekly basis. So at least for me, looking at it more from where I'm starting at and who's going to be available, I think that's where I've taken it. But if I can do like a true zero RB, like I've been leaning more and more that way this year, more so than like honestly like any year that I've been doing best ball, which kind of tells you a lot about like where I'd say just the evolution of drafters like has kind of come over the past like 4 or 5 years.
Oh,
Whereas
it's so much
yeah,
more comfortable to do it this year than in
yes,
previous years. That's
yeah.
it. Like the phrase used to be, and very much it's DFS phrase, but you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable when you try to take down large tournaments. But now it's like if you don't build this way, it can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And looking at some of these, like looking at some of the other rosters, it's just I would have trouble like drafting some of these teams, to be quite honest. It would be
Yeah.
very I'd be very uncomfortable with a lot of these builds. Whereas with where we're at right now, man, like this is a solid build. This is
Yeah.
really good.
Yesterday, I was on the Rotoviz channel with Colm Kelly, and we decided to predetermine to go into the draft and build out a robust RB team. And I think we kind of rescued it in the end. We started with Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and then I can't quite remember who we took as our third running back. It might have been, was it? Might have been down towards the Isaiah Pacheco range. If someone in the chat remembers, do throw it in there. But yeah, it was one of those where Colm very much a zero RB guy, myself zero hero RB guy, and sometimes it's interesting to throw those builds in to see how you can survive them. But as Rich in the chat mentioned, like the amount of teams in here who have barely any wide receivers already. We've got the team at the 5 spot, the team at the 4 spot, and then the team at the 1 spot, who have all only got one wide receiver. I would be feeling very uncomfortable. The only team close to ours is Michael, who is in the chat, who's saying he's had quite a few drafts recently where he's gotten close or really close to taking CD, Devonta in third, Jalen Hurts making it back. I've got at least one of them out there. And as Luke says in the chat, there's always at least one team taking 2 tight ends early. I mean, DraftKings drafts, they get wild. We jumped in when there was, there wasn't that many spaces. So most of the people who might have wanted to jump in with us missed out on that one. But yeah, we are 1 pick away, 5 straight wide receivers. Anybody screaming out to you at the top of ADP here?
Ken Walker, I'm not too scared about like grabbing, like if he just went. Okay, I saw him up there on the board.
So,
he just went. Aaron Jones, not as high on him like this season. Tight end, like what are we sitting at?
Tight end, Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson, 8 seconds to go.
None of that.
Should we go wide receiver? Oh,
Yeah,
Aaron Jones, Montgomery
there.
Pushed our luck on that one, but yeah, David Montgomery feels a little easier. Coming back around, any other running backs in this range that you'd like to target, or do you want to see where we're at? A wide receiver, we've kind of got Keon Coleman, Lad McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Roma Dunze, Jordan Addison, before it starts getting into a bit of a reach. And then at tight end, it's Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson.
No, I mean, running back, we can hit running back again, like honestly, if we really want to. Although, like looking at like who's there, actually nothing's really sticking out there either still.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird spot. I mean, I'd be fine taking Xavier Worthy or Roma Dunze, one of these rookie wide receivers. We've got 13 seconds to decide.
Yeah, let's go ahead. I'm fine with taking Worthy there.
Yeah, I like that. He started to fall a little bit over the last week or two as people seem to be a little skeptical that Rashee Rice is maybe going to get suspended for as many games. Xavier Worthy's sinking a little bit. I've noticed Travis Kelce sinking a little bit, but not in this draft where he went at the 204. How are you dealing with the elite tight ends this year, Chris? Because there's been a lot of conversations about it recently. Travis Kelce on DraftKings has been going at the 23rd spot overall for the last month or so, ahead of Sam Laporta. But on Underdog, Sam Laporta goes slightly ahead of Travis Kelce, I think. Are you trying to prioritize one of these guys, or are you just quite happy that you'll build around it?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to try and build around it. I don't think I've ever gone into a draft saying that I need to get like one of these elite tight, other than Mark Andrews. like getting the Mark Andrews Lamar stack if I can make it work, or even just drafting Andrews like on the auspices of being able to do the Houston Baltimore stack for week 17. I mean, that like he's probably been my most, he has like through 50 draft, I think he's probably like my highest exposed tight end. But if it's not going to be him, honestly, I'm fine like waiting through the Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson tier. Not as like sold on those guys. Like Ferguson, I think is fine. Evan Ingram, I do think he's a little bit inflated based off of how much time Christian Kirk missed like last year and how much more targets he earned like in that period. But if like you can sell me on David Njoku, let's going just a little bit later. You could sell me on, I mean, we were Pat Fryermuth for the KC Pittsburgh like correlation there, even though didn't have a solid year last year, but I can see a scenario where he's earning more targets. Noah Fant, like I've been really big on Noah Fant like throughout the offseason as well. And even all the way down to like Hunter Henry, we mentioned him earlier. Juwan Johnson, I was really big on until the foot surgery. So he's been one of the guys like I've been out on. But like I'm at least, I don't know. Like I know we say this every year that tight end is deep, but now like this is one of the years where I'm actually kind of looking at it's like I can talk myself into having like some of the Mike Gesicki if you really want to buy some of that propaganda.
Yeah.
I have been like hearing a bit more and more, and of course, being a Bengals fan, I do have to at least listen to it a little bit. But at least like most of these guys where you can talk yourself into at the very least them running routes. Like, are they out running routes? What is their potential target share? Like, are they going to be into the 8, 9, 10% target share? Are they going to be used in the red zone? Used like on like obvious passing situations and third downs? And for most of these guys that are going like once you get into the double digit rounds, I can actually see that. For a lot of those guys like Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, Isaiah Likely, even reading a story from The Athletic, I think it was just yesterday, about how they're going to try and evolve the Ravens offense around using some more 2 tight end sets, because that is where Lamar Jackson was actually the most efficient, even though they didn't use like that particular personnel package too often last season. So there is a scenario where they are trying to look at having Andrews and Likely on the field at the same time, like in 2024. So it's just there are like multiple options, at least to the point where now it's like, if I don't get elite tight end immediately, or if I don't like draft an elite tight end, I'm happy to build like a using a 3 tight end build and getting a lot of those guys in the double digit rounds.
Yeah, I love that, and definitely agree with you on Isaiah. Like last year, the Ravens, they just had such a priority on trying to get the wide receivers going for the first time in years, but it just felt like he fell by the wayside for a little bit. Joe Burrow does go to the auto drafter aside, 1 pick ahead of us. We've got Zach Moss, Najee Harris, David Njoku, Jalen Warren, Brock Purdy, Tony Pollard, Brock Bowers at the top. Or we could go down to Jaden Daniels if you liked. What are you fancying, Chris?
Jaden Daniels, even though we don't have like the stacking partner with him as of right now, but we can backdoor that if we need to. So I have no problems there.
Yeah, I like that. I've been trying to get a little more Jaden Daniels, and it feels like the rise is going to come for him over the next month. That we could be talking about a guy who's going 10 picks higher or so in the next few weeks. So we've got a 1-1-6-0 so far. In terms of the players who are going to be here for us, obviously we're in a pretty good situation at wide receiver. Running back, Zach Moss has fallen 10 spots past ADP. Najee Harris has fallen 10 spots past ADP. Moss does go. And then we could take David Njoku, who gives us week 15, 16, and 17 correlation, if you like. Or we could take a bet on Brock Bowers. Or where are you fancying?
Njoku would probably be my would be my pick here, and then we just have to prioritize like running back. But I mean, like we were talking earlier, I mean, once we get into like about this part of the draft, I mean, there are a number of like running back targets that we can make it work.
Yeah, I put out a video not too long ago talking about how this is my favorite area of the draft to target running backs. I'm kind of pick 72 to 110 over the last few years. It's just been such a productive area of the draft, and it allows you to build your team with a hero RB or a zero RB team up until that point really easily. And then this year, the quality of running backs falling into that area is so much better than previously. We do have a quick question in the chat, though, from Rich saying the team at the 104 looks like it's on auto draft. Does that affect your draft strategy at all if you know a team is on auto? Chris, you got any kind of thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. And
Five
yes,
running backs through 9 rounds, two quarterbacks,
yes,
one wide receiver, one tight end.
that looks like an auto drafter.
Oh yeah, we've got the green auto draft symbol up now.
Yeah. Like the part like first it's like that you get that initial frustration where it's like, oh, like any value that I thought was gonna fall to me, I'm just gonna wind up losing it like to the auto drafter. But no, you can plan around it just because you won't be able to be the person that catches the falling knife where like as guys slide past ADP, you might not be always able to pick up that type of value, but you can plan for some of the stacks or any of the correlations that you want to try and make just by making sure that you have like a plan B. So in our case, if we are looking, so let's say if we want to pick up, I don't know, if we want to draft Tua to, or not Tua, let's say if we want to draft like Deshaun Watson later to go with, I mean, we got Amara, we've got David and Njoku, we want to draft him later. All right, well, if that's not going to work out, like will we need to like flip the build and start looking at like what are other potential correlations there, like what are potential other options, like having a plan B like in our back pocket to say like, well, if we get not even necessarily sniped, but if the auto drafter winds up like ruining our primary plan, what's our backup and even tertiary plan in order to make this entire roster like kind of come together. So while it does suck, I mean, it's just one of the many parts of like drafting live, but at the same time it's understanding that like your most of your plans are going to wind up like getting foiled by your draft mates. Like that's honestly, some people go into drafts like trying to figure out, well, how can I break up somebody's stack and like make it work for myself.
Yeah.
So if it's an auto drafter or somebody that's doing it live, making sure that you have that back door in order to make sure that your roster still works is probably the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think like as long as you're cognizant of what there is in the room, when there's an auto drafter, you're not going to get a chance to scoop ADP values as much because they're going to be the players who are quite often just auto clicked onto the team. So that's something where it's like, okay, so I'm not going to get a chance to scoop value. So maybe I don't want to reach huge amounts at times, but I want to prioritize the things I need. Tua is very much near the top of the queue. We could add him to our Jalen Waddle team for a kind of be done at quarterback.
Yep.
Otherwise, there's guys like Tyler Lockett, Trevor Lawrence, Dalton Schultz, Herbert, Myers, Chubb, but then we can hit running back on the way back around if that's good with you, Chris.
Yeah, I'm fine with taking Tua now, and then we'll figure out look at running back like shortly thereafter.
Yeah, because the team at 102 did have Tyreek Hill,
Tyreek.
which I
Yep.
was
That was
conscious of. But in terms of these running backs, Javonte Williams, Nick Chubb, Zeke Elliott, Chase Brown, Gus Edwards, Zach Charbonnet, Rico Dowdle, which starts to get a bit of a reach down that far. But any of these guys that you're really banging the table for?
No, not really banging the table for, but at least I want to believe in Javante Williams. Like I want to believe in like the amount of opportunity that he could take like in this offense. But if it's not going to be him, because just looking at the archetype of running backs that are sitting behind him, I mean, you've got Jaleel McLaughlin, like who from a size and speed comparison, like he already profiles as a guy that's going to have, let's just say, a limited role. Like he'll get the third down, like obvious passing work. The 2 minute work, like we saw him work. Saw him work in that capacity in spurts, like in spurts last season. But it still was Javante Williams, like working in like the short yardage and goal line stuff, the
Yeah.
parts and like the components of the game that are most conducive to fantasy scoring, and that's what we want.
So
Now,
he goes. So
I'll
he
go ahead.
goes. So we've got Zeke, Chase Brown, Nick Chubb with 10 seconds, or Gus Edwards.
Give me Gus Edwards.
How confident are you feeling on that backfield? Like, because it feels like that's one which is very divided. You know, you've got people who are very on Vidal. You've got some people. Was listening to a podcast today where somebody was talking up J.K. Dobbins and saying that they're starting to believe and think that he could be the kind of guy to catch all the dump offs from Justin Herbert that Austin Eckler saw, health pending, of course.
Mhm.
And then there's people who are invested in Gus Edwards. I felt like Gus Edwards started to lose a step, particularly down the back half of last season. But maybe that was just because, you know, it was a tough season. He was still only coming, you know, a year further away from the ACL. Do you think he can kind of rediscover a bit of spark and get back to that kind of like 5 yards of carry form that he had?
Yeah, I think so. And just given the like offensive line investments that the Chargers like put into their roster, and I think not to say that Harbaugh is going to be just one of your classic, we're just gonna like, the ground and pound game, like with him and Greg Roman, like all that stuff, I mean, is going to come to fruition. Like, but just to what degree should we expect? Are they just going to run in non-advantageous spots? Are they going to put Justin Herbert like in like these long down and distance type situations that winds up putting the entire team in inefficient spots? I don't think so. So I do think that there's a scenario where Gus Edwards is actually used efficiently. Like he's actually used to some of his strengths where he still can be that early down grinder that we saw throughout parts of last season when he was playing like in Baltimore, while also still being the short yardage option. Because I have a problem with investing in a guy like J.K. Dobbins, just given the injury history, he's gone through at this point throughout his career. And Vidal, like, yeah, I want to hear a bit more about it, but I just haven't heard much of anything like about
No,
Vidal. Like that's the
I mean,
thing. It's like I saw the early draft hype for him, and then like him going, and then like since then, like OTAs, like just nothing, just
yeah,
nothing.
Kyle Dvorak of Rotoworld pointed out, I think it was last week, that none of them, the Chargers beat reporters, have even tweeted about Vidal since he was drafted. And
Yeah,
when he said that, I was like, wait, we haven't heard anything. Not even
no.
the biggest, like, oh yeah, he looks good out there, but we need to see him. But there was absolutely nothing. So yeah, definitely. The way I'm playing it is I take Gus now and again when I need him in those kind of builds. Occasionally I'll take Vidal if I've missed out on some of the other interesting rookie running backs. And then I'll scoop J.K. Dobbins when the value presents itself, because I've seen him go 50 spots past ADP. We are back on the clock, 2261 so far. We have Jahan Dotson we could throw in with a stack to Jaden Daniels. We've got at the running back position, Ty Chandler, Chuba Hubbard, Jalen Wright, J.K. Dobbins, Vidal. What are you thinking, Chris?
I mean, I see Tyler Algier here. Like he's been a guy I've been taking some shots on. Did Marshawn Lloyd go already?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I figured. So yeah, like if we can go like Algier, I wouldn't mind like grabbing him, and then I'm banking on a guy like Dotson like making it around the turn, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, we maybe could have played it the other way because Algier was still a little further down ADP, but I don't mind that because I've been getting very aggressive on Algier lately. I think he's probably the best backup running back in the NFL. I think if anything went wrong with Bijan Robinson, you're looking at a player who's going to get, yeah, Jahan Dotson does go. But that's okay. I mean, we can still look at some later options for that one.
Yeah, Luke
So,
McCaffrey and so on.
yeah, and there's a bit of a Breakfast Club narrative forming there on Luke McCaffrey and Jaden Daniels, both first guys in the facility, which is what we like to hear. We've got Darnell Mooney, who I know you're high on. He'd give us some week 17 correlation with Jaden Daniels. So I'll throw him in the queue. In terms of the running backs, is there anyone that you'd feel strongly, if we don't get one of these guys, the tier is going to be much worse when it comes back around?
Anybody else that's sticking out? I mean, like, because we like Vidal got taken already. Or no,
Yeah,
Vidal's
5
still there.
seconds.
Ooh, nobody's
5.
sticking out. Hubbard.
Let's Hubbard.
Yeah. Did we get him or no?
We got Mooney.
Okay,
Okay,
that's still
that'll
fine.
work. Yeah.
I just happened to notice him like sitting right there, and I was like, "Oh yeah."
So we're sitting on a 2-3-7-1. CD Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, David Montgomery, Xavier Worthy, Jaden Daniels, David Njoku, Tua, Gus Edwards, Tyler Algier, and Darnell Mooney. You mentioned Chuba there. Like, how confident are you in Chuba being useful for a decent part of the season this year? Do you think that he can hold Jonathan Brooks back enough that Chuba's going to have plenty of standalone value, or are you just thinking, okay, well, maybe he's the kind of running back that can get me through the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season, and then I just need some rookies to pick up the slack?
I mean, somewhere in between. I don't think he's gonna wind up like holding off like Jonathan Brooks, just given, I mean, all the statistics like from a like for missed tackles force like per carry, adjusted yards like after contact per carry. I mean, Jonathan Brooks is one of the better prospects like we've seen over the past like few seasons. So if he's good to go and he's healthy, I think he'll take the job. But Hubbard last season, I mean, from a success rate standpoint, like he was posting like top 24 like marks in terms of success rate. His like, and he also like was just at about like the 8-ish like percent target share. So like it's not like he was just out there just like running a few routes here and there, like grabbing a few targets. So I mean, he still was like that, still like legitimate like pass catching option for the Panthers, even though they were like towards the back end for almost every efficiency metric from a team level standpoint. But if he can still be that guy that's going to get like most of the work from an early down, short yardage, and also being like the team's like primary receiving back, honestly, I think he's one of those guys where if we start to hear negative, like, or we get like more of a picture of like what Brooks's timetable is going to be from him getting back to form, I mean, Chuba is going to be the guy that everybody's going to want to draft now. So I think from a CLV standpoint, like taking Hubbard is one of the guys that I would like to get.
Yeah, and Rich mentions in the chat, if Brooks goes on PUP, Chuba is going to fly up in ADP.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And it's going to happen. Like the way that Dave Canales talked about Jonathan Brooks, they're not going to push him to get out there early. There's no sense in them doing that. Like, why would you want to do that with a running back coming off an injury when I know they don't like Miles Sanders? But if you need to put Miles Sanders out there for a couple of weeks just to give Brooks a little more time, even if Brooks isn't missing time, he's not on any of the injured reserve or anything, but Brooks is going to start camp on the physically unable to perform list. Like, there's no reason for the team not to put him there. We see that year after year, even with players who are pretty much healthy, they might as well just put them onto that list so that they can add an extra camp body, try somebody else out and get another look at some. It's just, we are a couple of picks away. The Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Will Levis go off the board. We've got Jaden Daniels and Tua, so QB-wise, feels all right. We do have, in terms of ADP, Quentin Johnston, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Polk, K. Dotton, Vidal, Wandale Robinson, Henry, Ray Davis, McLaughlin, Benson Knott, who, we could maybe look at in this kind of range. What's standing out to you, Chris?
Ray Davis was actually kind of standing out for a guy that we can go ahead and grab like right there. If there's going to be a running back that I would pick, honestly, like looking at this build, I don't know, like would you look at like grabbing a third QB like in this particular build, or would you be comfortable with doing just like two quarterbacks? Because if we wanted to do like a third quarterback, I mean, we already have the Chargers as a potential bring back. So if we want to do like Drake May, like we were talking about earlier, there is a way that we can fit that in.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something to consider. I think we'll see how the next round plays out and see what's good. But like, I feel fairly good that Drake May, Bo Nix, who'd give us correlation on our Bengals pieces as well.
Yep.
He's somebody I seem to add on whenever I miss on Joe Burrow. Benson Knott doesn't make it back around the corner. Do we want to finish up at wide receiver or at least potentially finish up at wide receiver and just chuck Luke McCaffrey in here slightly ahead of ADP?
Say. Yeah, I was just going to say.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about this range, I mean, putting aside future All-Pro Rashad Bateman, there's an awful lot of guys who are very much the same. I know you've been quite high on DeMarcus Robinson. How high are you kind of willing to chase him up the draft boards?
I would, especially at this part in the draft. I mean, if it's for correlative purposes, so if I, drafted Puka earlier, I grabbed Stafford. I've even got the Arizona bring back or something along those lines. I grabbed James Conner or whomever. I'm willing to grab a guy like DeMarcus Robinson, like maybe like close to a round ahead of ADP, just in order to make sure that stack fits. But at this point, if I can get him like maybe half-ish round, like 6 to 10 picks, like before ADP, I have no problems. Just because we know that there's no tight end to speak of, at least none that I'm super high on. Colby Parkinson, like meh. But at least if we know that he's going to be out there running routes, they use like 3 wide receiver sets at the highest in league. I believe it was 95% like just last season. And for as high of a pass rate we can expect for Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford, I mean, DeMarcus Robinson, I know that's historically speaking, D-Rob hasn't been a guy that's delivered. I mean, the man literally he was like the 5th or 6th option for Patrick Mahomes, not like 4 or 5 years ago. So like, I get it. He also played with Lamar Jackson. I get it. But like we at least saw how like Sean McVay was able to use him. He was able to at least dust off like Tutu Atwell And it's not like they added anybody else like superior behind him, at least in this situation for this season. In this situation, like I understand the hype for this year. That's why I'm trying to take his historical stuff and kind of set that aside and say, yeah, he was bad then and he wasn't able to earn targets then, but in this situation I can tell myself a story. And also the metrics support how, at least in this situation with this team, he can earn targets and at least be somewhat valuable as a fantasy contributor. But am I going to chase him up into like, if we're talking like 13th round prices in August, I'm probably out at that point. But if where he's going right now, like 14th, 15th, like ish, okay, I can understand that for right now.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a couple of things we want to come back to in a minute, but we are a couple of picks away. There's Tyler Conklin, Troy Franklin, Jonnu Smith, Daniel Jones, Khalil Herbert, Marvin Mims, Chigo Okonkwo, Zay Jones, Chark, Drake May. The one who kind of stands out to me would be Jonnu Smith as our second tight end. Gives us another stacking partner for our Miami tour. Jalen Waddle gives us some more week 17 correlation.
Mm-hmm.
Are you good with that?
100%. And when it comes to stacking partners, at least on a team that's going to be like more, it's a concentrated offense, almost like when we're talking about the Rams, where it's like it's Puka, it's Cooper Kupp, and then it's going to be some combination of D-Rob, Kyron. We'll see how much the tight ends contribute. But I haven't done as much of like if I get Puka, I have to get Kupp, and then I draft like Matthew Stafford. Or if I get Tyreek Hill, I have to get Jalen Waddle, and then I have to get Tua. For me, it's normally been if I get the 1A, 1B option, I will try and go for like the tertiary option, like somewhere thereafter.
Yeah.
Just because the chances for spike weeks, like where both of those guys hit, for Tua or for like Jalen and Tyreek to hit, not as often as where you might see a third guy like pop up like here and there. So that's at least been my approach to like those teams that have more of those concentrated like pass catching trees.
Yeah. So we're back on the clock, 2482. The guy standing out for me is Roschon Johnson, who I know you like. Are you down with that, or would you prefer to be like, we could take Bo Nix, but I'd rather see if he comes back around because he does share the same bye week as Jaden Daniels anyway.
Yep, I'm 100% okay with that. And honestly, when you asked me earlier to start the show about like what storyline or whatever, that's actually one of my second, like if I had a second choice for what I want to know before we even get to training camp, if I knew how this Bears backfield is going to shake out, I would be a very happy man. I just want to know. Like I want to, because like I'm hearing reports about Khalil Herbert might not make the roster, even though
That's mad.
From an efficiency standpoint, he was one of the better running backs, not just within that group, but within the league, even on like a short-term basis. And what like I understand they paid DeAndre Swift, but Roschon Johnson also played well over the last 4 or 5 games of the season. Look at our utilization report, powered by Dwayne McFarland's brain over on Fantasylife.com. I mean, it showed that Roschon Johnson was starting to take over for Khalil Herbert in the areas in the parts and pieces of the of utilization that would actually be more conducive to fantasy scoring. So it's like, I want to take a bet on this Bears backfield. Honestly, I've been taking shots on like the Bears offense just in general. But still, I do think that there's a way that this can wind up working out for a guy like Roschon Johnson. And Richard, yes, Khalil Herbert goes to the Cowboys. My bags are already packed for that. My bags are packed for that, sir. Like he's another one of those guys. I would love to see that happen.
Yeah, and there's so many injuries that happen at running back. It just feels like that would make sense. You know, they paid DeAndre Swift, they drafted Roschon Johnson. Yes, they drafted Khalil Herbert, most of the people involved in the Bears still, but it's like, yeah, it just seems like they're kind of, if there was a chance, then they were going to move on from someone, then it would be Khalil Herbert. Of course, if it stays as a three-way committee, it is going to be pretty messy. I don't think you get too many situations where three-way committees are very useful to us in fantasy. But yeah, I'm definitely taking bets on this Bears offense. It feels like a very fun offense if Caleb Williams can get out there and do an awful lot. And we talked about kind of bringing players up draft board, and we reached slightly on a couple of players, but I use Spike Week's overlay, and you can see here this is their draft capital formula. And the difference we're sitting at is like -2, -2. We've barely reached, like, I've done drafts where that'd be down by like -10 points. I couldn't tell you exactly what goes into it, but it always makes me feel slightly reassured. We're a few picks away. Juwan Johnson does go. I've been really having to stop myself from taking him. I know you mentioned you
Same.
were really high on him. It's
Yep.
just, it sucks, but the foot injury does sound pretty iffy to say the least. I hesitate to say it before it's our pick, but if this team that's now no longer on auto draft has jumped back into the draft, if they don't take Bo Nix, I'd be down to take Bo Nix here so that we've got a free QB room. If you're okay with that, I can show you running back. We've got Alexander Mattison, AJ Dillon, Dylan Laub, Frank Gore, Naeem Hines.
Nothing sticks out here. I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all dried up.
Yeah, okay, so we'll take Bo Nix, give ourselves a free QB build. We don't have anyone on the Broncos, but we can maybe take a look with our 19th round pick for anything there. I think Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin are definitely gone by now. But in terms of other guys, other guys that you'd like to see in this range, Alexander Mattison, Naeem Hines. It gets pretty grim at running back. We probably need one more. We're sat with 3-5-8-2. Is there anybody in this range that you'd like to make a case for?
Yeah, Madison, I could see myself taking a stab at him. I mean, I'm not as sold on Zamir White. I'm sure he'll get the first crack at it, like from an opportunity standpoint. He was getting like most of the same touches or being used at the same rate as Josh Jacobs once Josh Jacobs like went down for the remainder of the season. The only place where he was really more deficient or wasn't used as much was just in the pass game. Surprisingly enough, like Jacobs was actually used more from a targets per run standpoint, like than what Zamir White wound up getting. So it's his job to lose. And if Alexander Mattison can reclaim like some of the hype that he had when he was still in Minnesota, I mean, at this cost, it's not the worst. It's not the worst option, even though we don't have any New Orleans to go with it from a week 17 standpoint.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on Madison. I've been drafting more of him lately just because that range of running back, I always find myself needing one in these last 3 rounds. And I don't think that Madison deserved to be going where he did last year when we were talking about a real dead zone proper running back. But when you compare where Zamir White's going at round 7 to Alex Madison, like, it feels like there's definitely a gap that could be closed on them. We don't have New Orleans, as you say, for week 17 correlation, but over here on right, you can see the correlations we've got. We've got Jaden Daniels and Luke McCaffrey in week 16, 17. We've got Miami correlating with Cleveland in week 17. We've got Bo Nix in week 16 and 17. The Miami guys we've got for 3 straight weeks: Kansas, Cincinnati, Miami, Tyler Algier and Darnell Mooney in week 15 and 17. CD Lamb with the Eagles in week 17. Like, it's so much green on this one in terms of little correlations that we've got. I feel pretty good about it. If you do want access to these tools, these are Spike Week overlays. All our gold tier YouTube membership package comes with 40% off all their products, which is well worth it if you're drafting a lot of these teams. This overlay works on DraftKings, Underdog, Drafters, well worth it. So I know your colleague Pete Overzet has talked a lot about scrolling the F down at the end of drafts. Have you got anybody that you like to scroll way down for? Rich in the chat is making a case for Tim Patrick's season.
It will always be Tim Patrick's season.
Yeah.
It will always be.
We got 3 picks before it's us. We definitely don't need a 4th quarterback.
No.
Running back, it's Rashad Penny is sitting right at the top. I'd forgotten he was in Carolina. Guys like Louis Rees-Zammit, Evan Hull, Kenneth Gainwell, Miles Sanders, Justice Hill, Rasheen Ali, wide receiver. Khalif Raymond is somebody I occasionally take. Nelson Aguilar, Juwan Jennings.
Trey Sermon, Evan Hall still there? Either of those guys gone already?
Let's see. Trey Sermon's there. He's right. He's down at 230, so not getting drafted every time. I'll take Trey Sermon happily.
Yep. I wouldn't mind taking a stab at that backfield. At least, I don't know, like every offseason, I feel like Sermon winds up getting the hype as being the RB2 behind whomever he's behind, whether it was when he was out in San Francisco or now that he's behind like Jonathan Taylor, it could just as easily be Evan Hull. But at least for the information we have right now, Sermon being the guy that's behind like JT, at least taking a stab on him isn't the worst idea.
Yeah, so we finish up with a 3-7-8-2. CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, David Montgomery, Xavier Worthy, Jaden Daniels, David Njoku, Tua, Gus Edwards, Tyler Algier, Darnell Mooney, Ray Davis, Luke McCaffrey, Jonnu Smith, Roshan Johnson, Bo Nix, Alexander Mattison, and Trey Sermon. I think the only kind of question for me was maybe whether we could have put a third tight end on this build. David Njoku and Jonnu Smith maybe feels a little fragile. Do you agree, or do you feel good about him?
No, I agree. And kind of looking back at it, I mean, even if we were able to shoehorn in, like, let's see, now I'm looking at some of the guys that were going later. I mean, Sinnott, I know we talked about him like earlier. That would have been like a pretty good, even we went like 2 picks before ours as we wound up taking McCaffrey. We talked about Isaiah Likely, but even just like tacking on to some of those guys in that particular range, Gesicki, I don't know. I mean, one of those guys I think would have been just as fine.
Yeah, and I guess if we'd taken Benson up, would we have taken Luke McCaffrey? And then it becomes, which do you feel better about, really? Like, I know earlier on in the chat, somebody asked, what were your feelings on Benson up this year? I've been kind of a little bit negative on taking him, particularly earlier in draft season, where he really got pushed up boards very quickly. And it just felt like, to me, I look at Washington and go, okay, they didn't spend anywhere near the amount of resources they needed to on the offensive line in the draft. Is Benson not going to end up blocking far more than we would like him to, because we know that he's a capable pass blocker, or at least he was in college? So I've been struggling with him. Are you in or out on Benson at this current kind of 15th round ADP?
Where he's going at right now, I'm in. If we get to in a couple weeks, like once training camp starts and we start to see the videos of him catching passes and like Jaden Daniels doing his thing and like getting hype and he starts to rise, then I might be out, because I do have some concerns about what is his route participation going to be like in the earlier parts of the season, where we've literally seen Zach Ertz play over a high-end tight end, which is, I would assume, I would say Trey McBride is a much better prospect than Ben Sinnott is, and we've seen like Zach Ertz play over like one of those guys. So can we see a situation at the start of the year where Sinnott is more of a blocker, or Sinnott isn't even on the field, or isn't even playing those types of snaps? So without really knowing what his role is going to be, considering he did some like H-back like type of stuff also when he was in college. So until we get like more signs that Cliff like one knows what he has and knows how to use him in this offense, like I think right now his upside justifies the cost. But if he now starts to go earlier after we get more camp hype, then I might be a bit more wary about drafting him than where he's at right now.
Yeah. In terms of our team, you feel pretty good about it? Is this the kind of team you build yourself, or how are you feeling?
Overall, yes. But to your point, I think the only adjustment that I would make would be the tight end position. But like we were talking earlier, having a guy like David Njoku, like I can talk myself into having a build where if I miss out on the elite tight ends, having a guy like him as my tight end one, I'm not too upset about. It's just I would then just build around it by having a third one. But in this quarterback room, the upside that we have from a week-to-week standpoint, that might, and especially the wide receivers, like we're at least able to mask some of that deficiency, like with the wide receivers, with the upside from the quarterbacks. So I'm not as concerned about it. But overall, yeah, I mean, having the strong wide receiver start like we have, and then having like at the very least two stable running backs, whether it's like going to be like David Montgomery like 1 week, or even like in some of the shots that we took at the running backs that we took later. We have Gus Edwards for the earlier parts of the season. We know that he's healthy, but let's see what Algier and Bijan's role like winds up shaking out at. We at least can project some goal line short yardage role for Ray Davis, so that should be worthwhile. Roshan, we talked about. If Khalil Herbert winds up getting cut or traded to the Cowboys, like now he becomes the running back two on an offense powered by Shane Waldron, who last year alone, he was they had one of the lowest like red zone passer over expectations when he was still like in Seattle. So at least there is some credence to the idea that the Bears are a bit more run heavy when they get into the red zone. So I mean, like I can see like each week like where it's going to be one of those guys where you can see them being put in advantageous situations, whereas I don't have to worry about the wide receivers. I don't care. Pick four and run it. Like I do not care. So I think overall, like we were able to execute at least a zero RB type of build, I think quite successfully.
Yeah, one of the other zero RB builds in here is drafter out the 11 spot, Dulutomsky, who is in the chat with us. Garrett Wilson, Drake London, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Rashad White in round 5, Jaden Reed, Jordan Addison, Brian Thomas. I mean, like that is 7 wide receivers in your first 8 picks is powerful. Austin Eckler, Caleb Williams, Schultz, Rico Dowdle, Burton, Mayfield, Braylon Allen, Demarcus Robinson, Will Shipley, Chigakonkwo, JJ McCarthy, and Dawson Knox. I think that's definitely a team which has got plenty of firepower. I think if I've gone 7 wide receivers in the first 8, around this range, I'd possibly be looking a little bit more at the running backs than the wide receivers, and definitely Demarcus Robinson. I think I could have talked myself out of and tried to end up on like a 3-6-8-3 instead. But it's definitely a fun team. In terms of the other ones we've got in here, some of these teams that really started off quite funky. The auto drafter next to us finished with 3-6-9-2. They had a hero wide receiver approach, with Jamar Chase being the first and only wide receiver they took between rounds 1 and round 10. They had 3 quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, who was auto-picked, and then they scooped a decent bit of value on Kirk Cousins, who fell past ADP, and then really hammered wide receiver to finish the draft to try and salvage it with Quentin Johnston, Wan'Dale Robinson, Zay Jones, DJ Chark, Odell Beckham, Darius Slayton, and Elijah Moore. I think, when you've fallen asleep or you've ended up on auto draft, that's sometimes what you've got to be willing to do. You've just got to hammer one position and say, I don't particularly agree that all these players are good, but I'm just going to keep hammering them and try and give myself a decent structure here. Anything else in this draft that stands out to you, Chris?
Honestly, so that one did stand out because as we were drafting, we were both pointing out that like, man, like this person starting with Jamar Chase is going to have a time of it like thereafter. But looking at the drafter in the first spot that like went like back to back like running backs like out of the gate, which I thought was actually fairly interesting because I'm thinking of like almost from like, let's see, if we want to apply like DFS logic like to a best ball tournament, you would think that from a combinatorial standpoint, most folks, if they draft Christian McCaffrey out of the 101, they're going like wide receiver. So I would think that this is already kind of a unique build, like first off, but then also going with like Josh Allen and then Dalton Kincaid like right after that. So really you're not doing any wide receivers until like the 5th round. And like while I don't necessarily agree or like I'm not as high on the wide receivers drafted, I get the strategy. Like I understand like the process of how you would get there. I would probably just shift some of the names around, like because I'm not as high on Keon Coleman. I prefer Curtis Samuel at cost, like over Keon Coleman, but I get like where you're at, like in order to take some of those guys. So it's like I get it. I get like what like how they wound up like on that squad, and like the uniqueness of the build is like that's something like I would honestly like I haven't thought to do beforehand. So, but now looking at it, it's like I might shift some of the names around, but I might actually try and do something like that the next time I get that spot.
Yeah, so the main, like I thought it was a very smart team in that first 4 picks, like you say. And I don't have any problem with Jalen Warren. I think Zach Moss, I probably would have traded for a Curtis Samuel or Khalil Shakir.
That's it.
And then once we get down here, you're talking about, okay, through 11 rounds, they've got 5 running backs, and we finish up with 7. Khalil Herbert, Kamani Vidal probably feel redundant to me. I think if one of them, you're basically talking, you need Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey to hit almost every week. But then you're talking about you've got 5 other guys that you are hoping to fill your flex spot every week because the wide receivers aren't necessarily good enough that one of them will be filling your flex spot as your wide receiver 4. So yeah, maybe knock 1 or 2 running backs off and get up to 9, 10 wide receivers, which is something which is viable on DraftKings. We've seen plenty of 10 wide receiver teams in the finals. We've got somebody in the chat saying I drafted a CMC Henry Jacobs team out of 101 just to try a different strategy. It's definitely that point in the season. Like, we've all drafted a lot of teams. We're hitting that point where you've got to try something different at times, and you want to be able to build differently so that you can see how it looks and see whether it's viable. But yeah, we've got plenty more time to draft though. But Chris, you guys over at Fantasylife, you're churning out content left, right, and center. The daily newsletter which goes out is something I read without fail every single day, and I can't say enough about how much I love the work you guys are doing. But anything in particular you guys have got cooking that people should be really checking out?
For right now, I mean the team previews and honestly, the thing that people should be checking out is the magazine. I forgot about that, because but it's so we Fantasylife, we have our own like a printed magazine, which is actually really cool, and features like 5 articles from this guy like right here like in it, which I also thought was like pretty cool. But of course, I mean, we have Matthew Berry, like kind of like, of course, like, putting his stamp on it, like Ian Hartitz, Dwayne with the rankings, like Kendall. I mean, the entire crew like pitched in and like did their part in order to make this thing a reality. So if you're ever at bookstore or airport or wherever, I mean, try and look for the Fantasylife magazine and check that out. For sure. The only part is don't get too mad at me about the sleeper columns that I wrote, because hand to God, I wrote those articles in like the early parts. When did I write those? I wrote those in like early April, and the magazine didn't come out until like a few weeks ago. And it's like by that time, I was like, oh, sweet. Like this Dontavian Wicks guy, he actually might be a good sleeper. I think he's like, I think I really got something here. And then like, I think it was like a week after, or no, I don't think it might have been that same week that I submitted that wide receiver sleeper article like to the editor. Then I think JJ was talking about him. Davis was talking, like pretty much the whole like best ball hive was talking. I was like, this isn't going to work. I should have been talking about Bo Melton or something like that instead, but you know how it goes.
But in redraft leagues, particularly deeper ones, like there's still so many people that just don't even know the name Dontavian Wicks. So
I thought it was, I just thought it was fun. But that's honestly one of the ways that you gain some confidence. Is like when you find something and you're just like, hey, I think that might actually work. But then it's like everybody else like also gets on as well. It's like, oh, hey, that's kind of some confirmation bias that like I think my process actually worked out, and like I actually did like find something. Now, of course, by the end of the season, it probably will be Bo Melton that's going to dust off like all of the Green Bay wide receivers, but I digress. But I think the biggest thing for Fantasylife is like everything over there is free. I mean, all the content that you see, like whether it's the newsletter that comes in every morning, the projections, the team previews that Ian and Dwayne have been cranking out, the podcast, the stuff on the YouTube, like anything on YouTube. I mean, all the stuff is free. And we all put like so much work into it to really like give as much of like the hard hitting and fun analysis. I mean, I have so much fun being able to talk and hang out with Ian and Dwayne on a weekly basis that it's just the work really kind of like the work is the work. But I mean, just having the chance to talk with them and learn each week from them is such a great time. So fantasylife.com. Go and check out like all the new tools, all the stuff that we got coming. Like Scott Fishbowl, for folks that are a part of that. Josh ADHD, like his tool there is actually going to be hosted on Fantasylife's website here, like, and that should be coming soon. So I mean, just everything there, like for the fact that you don't have to pay for it. I mean, it should be like an easy reason for you to come and sign up. So come and check us out if you ever get a chance.
Yep, massive fans of not only all the great tools and content you guys have, but just yourself, Chris, Ian, Dwayne, both coming on the channel over the next couple of weeks. I know when we get into redraft, we've also got Dwayne coming back on for then. In terms of this channel, on Monday, we'll be back with an underdog stream. Next Wednesday, it will be Dwayne McFarland. We've got Dynasty content coming at you left, right, and center from Rich. Loads more best ball stuff on the way. Appreciate everyone being here tonight. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button, and we will catch you again very soon.